everybody. Can we get a round of applause for Casey, who pulled this whole thing together? Thank you, Casey. I also discovered on the way up here that Taylor and I picked out the same shoes this morning, which is not surprising given his incredible taste in footwear. Thank you all for being here. And we're going to get started today talking about application frameworks. Thanks for this to this amazing panel for being here. I'm going to keep the intros very short because I think this group's body of work largely speaks for itself. But we're really lucky to have Eric Seidel, creator of Flutter and CEO of Shorebird. Armin, I'm certain I'm going to botch your last name, Ronacher, which is wrong, creator of Flask and also head of platform at Sentry. And then Taylor Otwell, creator of Laravel and CEO of Laravel, the company. So thanks everybody for being here. I thought a fun place to get started would be to sort of rewind and look back to the early days of as you were each getting started with your respective projects. Eric, if I'm correct, I think you started Flutter in earnest around 2017. Taylor, you started Laravel around 2011, maybe late 2010. And Armin, I think you were getting started around the same time with Flask. Maybe let's go one by one. Eric, tell us a little bit about the state of the world as you were getting started.
Yeah, so I think the first commit to Flutter was about 2014. The state of the world was the Microsoft phone was dying. The world was not actually that different from it is way now in that everybody just writes everything twice, or all the big companies do. And that was becoming increasingly a problem at Google. Yeah, so the state of the world briefly is that it is how it is now, is that everybody writes everything twice. And Google needed a solution to stop writing everything twice.
And were there any particular projects out there or companies or just anything that you took inspiration from in the early days that sort of got you going?
Yeah, so Flutter started from Chrome. We were 6 people out of Chrome, and we started with the goal of can we make a fast mode for the web? Just delete all the crazy bits. And we succeeded in that, and we made it 20 times faster. And that got us funding from Larry's, Google 2.0, secret sauce, whatever. And we, I lost my train of thought, sorry. But
No, your train of thought's incredible. Keep going. Other things that inspired you in the early days when you were getting started, was there like a project that you looked to, or a founder, or a company that sort of motivated you early on?
I mean, we were very inspired by the web. Like, we wanted the web, we just wanted to not suck. Like, I had worked on the web for a decade, and this group of people believed strongly that all mobile apps should just be web apps. And so we tried. We put our money where the mouth was, and we tried to build the calendar for Android. We tried to build the calculator for Android, and we couldn't. We couldn't make them good enough. With the web, and so we had to build a new stack. But we took a lot of inspiration from React, right? From the React Web Framework. We liked that direction that frameworks were going in of like, can we stop having 2 different ways to update our state? Can we just have like one?
Yeah, very cool. Armin, how about you? Take us back to 2010, early days of Flask.
So 2010 was when Flask was created, but the libraries that I built for it, they were older. And I don't know exactly when I started. I think it was probably like 4 years earlier. And what ultimately led me to build Flask was just that I realized that just building open source libraries in itself wasn't... It was fun to see the users, but like if you package it up in a way where like this is how you're supposed to use that, and if you put some documentation, marketing around it, then you get more adoption. And that to me was actually just really nice to see that there are all these people using it. And what actually led me to build the libraries first and then Flask later was that the Python web ecosystem compared to PHP, what I was using before, was a little bit, I wouldn't necessarily underdeveloped, but it was quite fragmented. And there was this emerging standard called WSGI where you could basically pick your web server freely. So you could use Apache, Nginx, Light HTTP, which was there at the time. And so there was quite a bit of stuff you could do to make your application work in different environments. And for me, the motivation at the time was actually something that we mostly stopped doing, which is building software that you can redistribute. So there was Track at the time, which was a project managed, like a self-hosted GitHub. There was PHPBB, there was WordPress. There were all these websites that you could sort of deploy yourself and make a custom version of it. And that was actually my original motivation for this, like build a framework that you can build applications with that you can bring on-prem. And so that was actually what mostly motivated me originally. And it just happened that that kind of thing that you would need for that kind of survived, even though people don't do that much anymore, because now you have all these small little pieces that you put in your infrastructures, like microservices or small little pieces. And so Flask is still a pretty good choice for that.
And then Taylor, how about you? Early days, 2010, Little Rock, Arkansas, I believe. What sort of inspired you to start Laravel?
Oh gosh. So I always tell people I kind of accidentally became a PHP programmer. I was actually an enterprise.NET and COBOL developer, another hot stack. But I had side project ideas that I wanted to build, like web apps I wanted to build. I had used PHP a little bit in college, so that was kind of the only other web language I was remotely familiar with. So I thought, okay, well, I'll try to hack something together in PHP. And of course, before I did that, I needed to build an entire web framework to build those applications, of course. And the state of PHP at that time was a depressing state, I would say. A lot of developers were seeing Ruby on Rails, which was sort of king of the hill of full stack web development at the time. A lot of those developers seemingly enjoying their web development experience and saying, hey, I'd like to have some of that cool stuff too. So when I was first building Laravel, I tried to look at a lot of different web frameworks. Ruby on Rails, Flask was one, another Ruby framework called Sinatra, and even the .NET web frameworks, and try to sort of bring a lot of the best ideas together in terms of routing, database interaction, authentication, and offer sort of a fresh take on web development to PHP, which I think people found a breath of fresh air at the time.
Yeah, it's funny having you and Armin on this panel together, because I recall in one of our first conversations, you mentioned to me that Flask was kind of an early inspiration as you were getting Laravel going. Say more about that. When did you become aware of Armin and Flask, and what'd you admire about it back then?
Well, Flask was beautiful in its simplicity, I would say. It's I think what most people call kind of a micro framework. And so basically, as I was building Laravel, say I'm working on the routing engine for routing requests to endpoints. I would just Google, Flask routing or Rails routing and look at, okay, well, how do they solve this problem? And, take the ideas that seemed really cool and that were interesting and incorporate them into Laravel. And I built and deleted Laravel probably 4 or 5 times over the course of a year before I actually released it out to the public in the summer of 2011.
So I'd love to hear from each of you more about that process, because each of your projects today are at sort of various phases of maturity, but maybe share with the audience the journey to get from inception to V1 for each of you. Like Taylor, you said you sort of deleted it 6 times and started from scratch. Eric, maybe I'll call on you. What was it like getting to V1?
Yeah, it's interesting to be listening actually to this panel. That the date you quoted was our I think 1.0 date, right? And you talked about you deleted it 4 or 5 times. We wrote the entire system, the entire Flutter 3 times in JavaScript before giving up on the language. Nothing against JavaScript, we just could not. We had written so much JavaScript, we couldn't get it to start up fast enough to be usable on iOS. It took 12 seconds to launch. And so we had to move to an ahead of time compiled language. So the journey to V1 was so much of writing and throwing away, writing, trying to get someone to use it. We ended up as an iOS and Android framework, but that's not how we started. The first customer, I think, was Google Fiber, who was later killed. Shortly after that customer, which is still shipping Flutter today, was the Google Assistant home devices. And I think what some of this gets back to, it's finding your first customer, and it's who needs you the most, right? And those people needed us because they had no other option, or their best other option was the web. And we used way less memory and we're way faster than the web. So yeah, the journey to 1.0 was very long. It was 3 years, of writing and throwing away and such for Flutter. Yeah, I think it's impossible to see until you've walked it.
Right. Armin, what about for you? What was it like getting to V1 and who were the early adopters?
Yeah, so the sort of fun story about Flask is that from the moment I wanted to write it to actually writing it, it was only like a month. But it wasn't because I knew exactly what I wanted to do. There was this joke before where a lot of people wanted these micro frameworks at the time that's like single file, no dependency, everything. So I took all the libraries that I already had, which were the dependencies. I zipped it up, put it into a Python file, base64 encoded, and I made had a friend of mine do this fake podcast, not podcast, like a screencast of like this is the latest and greatest framework, and that got really popular, even though it was a pure joke. But the thing is that the reason I could write it in 1 month was because I had basically 3-4 years of experience of people using my library. So I kind of knew what worked, what they liked, what they didn't like. So up to that point, I basically wrote like 4 or 5 other frameworks. And it was always with the intention in mind of solving a problem. Like I actually never wanted to write those frameworks. I wanted to create products, but most of them I never finished because I kind of got stuck on the framework. But it is still useful to try to actually build something, even if you don't succeed in it, because only by using it you learn how it should actually behave. And so it took a lot of trial and errors to see like, this is the patterns that work better and these are the ones that don't.
So it's very cool to hear about, each of you humbly describing sort of coming from modest beginnings, and then you compare that to the enormous reach and scale and impact that your frameworks all have today. My math is probably wrong, but I was doing a little bit of homework in advance. I think cumulatively, this panel, and I'm not contributing at all, accounts for like 8 million monthly package installs, over 300,000 GitHub stars, and just millions and millions of monthly active users. Maybe if you could just quickly go down the line, give the audience an idea of your current sort of scale and reach, however you choose to define it.
So I no longer have Google's internal numbers, but my guess is that Flutter is about 1 million monthly active users, and about in the several millions, like 3, 4, 5 million yearly actives. And I think there's probably around 1 million Flutter apps. So yeah, long way from humble beginnings.
Armin, how about you?
So I definitely don't have any numbers at the moment, but I think what's kind of interesting about Flask is that it's decomposed into the libraries that make it, which in itself was also a libraries that he created. And so they on their own also kept their own little ecosystem going. So Flask itself, like for me, the biggest reach that I was proud of was actually seeing it show up in university courses. That like to see so many like first year students actually put up their stuff on GitHub, that was like really interesting, because all of a sudden you had this feeling of like actually you're sort of going into like a next generation of developers. But for me, the most interesting one reach-wise was the templating engine I wrote, because I expected that thing to die over and over as everybody went to a JavaScript frontend. So like, why would you still need a templating engine? But then it kind of kept not dying, because first of all, people for reasons I don't understand started using it to script infrastructure. So Ansible and Salt used it. So like even today at Sentry, I still have to use this thing because our infrastructure gets written with it. And now like this AI ecosystem started using it to generate chat prompts out. So this is kind of funny that these things just hang around. And it's pretty impressive.
Taylor, what's the current reach of Laravel?
I think on package installs, I think Laravel's installed something like 250,000 times a day, through the package managers. I think, maybe a better stat for us is we have our Forge, which is our deployment platform for Laravel apps, and we're currently managing a little north of like 500,000 Laravel applications on our platform alone. And I'm sure there's many others out there as well. So it's just crazy. I never expected that kind of reach out of the little PHP framework I started all that time ago.
So maybe for each of you, and Taylor, starting back with you, was there a moment when you sort of knew that you were onto something, either an important ecosystem integration or maybe a contributor that you sort of had buy-in from? It sounds like for Armin, it was sort of had something to do with like the academic setting and the university setting. For the other respective frameworks on the panel, was there sort of a moment where you knew you had created something big?
There's definitely been pretty cool moments. A lot of it comes through interactions I have at Laracon, through people that have used the framework and told me what they've built with it, whether they've built some dashboard for the Boston Celtics or one person used it for something on the Boeing 777. It's just like, whoa, that is really crazy. So stuff like that is always really cool to hear about. And honestly, like the most heartwarming stories are just like individual solo entrepreneurs that have come up to me at Laracon and being like, I was able to change my life and like support my family because of this framework and this application I built with it, you know. And for me, that was actually the most impactful moments, I would say. But then definitely hearing all of the cool companies that have used it. I mean, WWE, the wrestling company, you know, thorough Laravel shop. So that's cool.
Eric, what about for you? Maybe not Boeing, but like is Airbus a user that might be a better logo these days?
I mean, Flutter is all over, but I would second what Taylor said, which that I think that the thing that had motivated me and I think much of the team very early on was just the waste of human life that is going into writing the same thing poorly, you know, twice, 3 times, whatever. And like, can we just stop that? And so it's the meeting the person who's like, I built my business out of this thing. Or I met somebody in the crowd today who was like, I built a stock trading app for my wife. And like, she's the only person who uses it. That's a success for me, that it was possible for you to do that, right? Like that should exist in the world. And I'm glad that Flutter has been a part of that.
It's very cool. When you think about from a non-technical perspective, Eric, what have been some of the challenges along the journey?
I mean, what haven't been the challenges, but operating inside of a large company is a giant pain in the rear. Just the funding dance and the managing up and the managing down. The challenges. I think that that's a learning that I took from Flutter was just all the stupid things that are going to kill you that just aren't the technical problem. I was talking with somebody in the audience before. I used to work on performance stuff and, you know, low-level algorithms and stuff, and they did it for a career. And like one of the things I learned from that was just how rare it's the core low-level algorithm that's super hyper-optimized that matters the optimization thereof, right? And it's the same thing for a business or for Flutter. It's like how rare it's like whether we chose the right function name here or Dart versus JavaScript or whatever. It's all just all the rest of the stuff. Did I hire the right people? Did we fire the right people? Did the bills come in on time? There's lots of non-technical stuff, more than I ever thought.
Armin, what about you? Non-technical challenges over the years?
I think the biggest challenge for almost all the things is how do you work with other humans? So for an open source project in particular, once you become a little bit too popular, you have to figure out governance and community management, and I didn't manage that at all. So I had 2 attempts of doing this, both of which went kind of poorly. I think in the end it worked out fine, but not because of my input. Like for instance, the current maintainer on Flask is David Lord, and I'm super grateful that he's doing that. But the fact that it works at all is his accomplishment, not because I did a particularly good job at this. And I think it was to some degree also that I felt like I don't want to make Flask too much of my emotional problem. So there was so many users of it already, and I felt like if I get a little bit too invested into it, for it being a non-commercial open source project, that's not healthy for me. And so dealing with this, everybody uses it, but at the same time, you don't really feel like there's a very clear path to commercialization that you actually want to do. So I was like, I'm like a very clear cut here. Like this is the involvement that I want to have in it, because for me, that's how I want it, basically. But it's this sort of community engagement and all that stuff around these open source projects can be really challenging.
And Taylor, what about for you? Because, you know, on the one hand, you created Laravel, the framework. You also are CEO of Laravel, the company. How do you balance the technical and the non-technical, you know, challenges and obligations in your life?
You know, I've always tried to maintain a very specific vibe in the Laravel ecosystem, in the sense that I always want us to be an ecosystem that pushes forward, that's not afraid to take risks, that's not afraid to try something new. And I think on the business side, I've tried to very much hire people that also think that way as developers, and all the way through the organization. Because I think when Laravel's been around as long as it has, it's a constant challenge to always see the framework through the eyes of a newcomer. Because since I've been maintaining it, 14 years now, if I see feedback on social media or something like, oh, I find this confusing, or I don't understand how this works, it's very easy once you've been maintaining something for a while to be like, well, you just are using it wrong, or you just don't get it, And I think you have to constantly challenge yourself to be empathetic to those kinds of viewpoints, because you've lost the ability to see it with those eyes, And I think that's what keeps the framework approachable, and we make sure that it's still easy to use, easy to onboard new people into the ecosystem. So that's a constant challenge for me that I'm always thinking about.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting you bring up that approachability. That's always struck me as a unique, hallmark of what you've built at Laravel. There was something funny on an exchange on Twitter the other day where somebody said, I submitted something to support at Laravel and I got this automated message from Taylor. What's this all about? And you were like the next reply. You're like, that's not automated. I wrote that. And it always blows me away when I try to put into perspective the scale of your user base and just what you've created, but also the approachability that you've sort of branded the company and the framework around. Are there lessons to be learned for other founders out there, other folks who are both sort of straddling the world of commercial open source, but also, very deeply technically involved in the project themselves?
Oh gosh, I'm not sure I'm the best expert on this. I mean, I've always tried to, build. It is hard to listen to community feedback, build the products you think you need to build for the company, while also being forward-looking and not. Sometimes the users actually don't know totally what they want. They kind of know what they want, and you kind of have to suss out what the best solution is. But yeah, I've just always tried to balance the community feedback aspect, blend in our own ideas of where we think we want to push the product forward as far as innovation goes, and try to find a balance of the two so that we can keep the community happy while also keeping the whole thing feeling fresh.
Yeah, so to keep going in that direction, because we started off thinking about the past, how you all got started. We've talked a little bit about the explosion of these communities. Now to be just a little bit forward thinking, and I'll ask for kind of a peek into the roadmap and what's to come for these frameworks. Eric, you made this good point when we were chatting earlier that I wanted to bring up. These frameworks are supposed to be a time saver versus like building the individual pixels yourselves, but they often also come with a learning curve for the developer. How do you think about striking the right balance?
Yeah, I guess I would go back to what Taylor said, which is that so much of this is just about listening to the user. I mean, I have lost any ability to be the right person to decide what our APIs look like. And that's got to be people who are closer to the ground. In terms of striking the right balance, yeah, I think that happens at sort of a more macro scale in the open source economy, because I think that the frameworks tend to like pick a lane, and that just happens to be, and hopefully we picked a good enough one that'll keep Flutter around for another 20 years.
So for each of you, I'll ask for this sort of glimpse into the roadmap. I'm curious, broadly speaking, what is sort of in the future? And then I'm also curious, when you think about roadmap planning and mapping out the future, how important is it to you to be in sync with sort of the broader goals of your respective language ecosystems? Like, to what extent do you function independently, and how do you balance that with needing to be in sync with the broader landscape? Maybe, Armin, I'll start with you.
So that's actually interesting insofar as that a lot of what people started doing with Flask is building very small little pieces of it, particularly in the ML, AI space. There are a lot of these little services. They're written in Flask, but you have like 200 of them. And the problem with the Python ecosystem, and I think probably a lot of people are aware that I also built a package manager recently, because that actually was the most painful thing and continues to be the most painful thing, is if you have so many of them and dependencies and everything along the way, it doesn't matter how great your framework is if the most painful part of it is actually getting Python going, getting all the packages in. And so I still hope that we're getting this better in the Python ecosystem, but I'm painfully aware of people using it that packaging is a challenge still for Python, and then every Flask user by extension suffers from this.
Eric, how about you? What's on the roadmap?
Flutter, interestingly, does not suffer from language divergence because Flutter and Dart, they both used to report to me like they sit together. That's both good and bad. In terms of what's on the roadmap, I think the thing that I think the most about is how to help Flutter. Like, I think we crossed the chasm a long time ago to think about that sort of framing. But like, I think we're still pretty early majority. Like, how do we reach further, deeper into the market? So I guess I think about it more from a business perspective than from a technical perspective. I think the technical perspective for Flutter and stuff, like they're exploring 3D and games and like, are there wider things? But I think the bigger thing is like, how do you help more people in the world take advantage of stop writing everything twice?
And Taylor, future of Laravel, what can you share with us?
I'll go back to the past for a second. When I first started writing Laravel, PHP was many people's entry point into the web. It was very common if you became a web developer that a lot of people came in either through PHP or maybe Ruby on Rails. Nowadays, that is not the case. I feel like most people coming into the web are coming in through JavaScript. So I think what's interesting for me is that I feel like Laravel offers a very comprehensive solution for writing full stack web applications in a way that has not totally been replicated in the JavaScript space. So for me, what I'm thinking about now is, I see in other ecosystems, people are piecing together all these isolated packages, maybe to handle database, to handle authentication, to handle whatever else. When I'm kind of thinking like, you should just use Laravel, like we have all this stuff in a package, and sort of how do we market that to this generation of web developers that are not necessarily coming in through the top of funnel of PHP anymore, and keep it relevant and keep it interesting and show them that this is a very productive way to build modern web applications. So that's pretty much what occupies my mind, I would say, pretty much every minute I'm awake at this point.
So as I see our clock ticking down, I'm going to attempt to jam two last questions into a quick lightning round. So the first obligatory AI ML question. Give us some color just on maybe where you fall on the AI hype spectrum, scale of 1 to 10. 10 being really, really hyped and 1 not at all. And then how is it just generally affecting your framework? Eric?
I'm probably a 3 in the not very hyped, but Copilot is amazing and everyone should be using Copilot. And how does it affect our framework? I don't know yet. I know that AI is just consuming Google at the moment. At least it seems that way from the outside. And I know that the Flutter team is involved a lot in that, but I don't know what they're doing there.
Armin?
Probably like, 7 out of 10 hyped, just because I love using this stuff in one form or another. And I think for Flask and the Python ecosystem, it has been great. There are a lot of people newly coming into this that previously wouldn't have used it. So yeah, I don't think it would have done anything to Flask itself though.
Taylor?
I would say I'm fairly bullish on AI overall. Compared to the you'll buy your next house with an NFT level of hype. I'm not quite there, but I'm actually pretty bullish on it. I've used it both in my personal life and in Laravel. We've integrated it into sort of our exception debugger to offer solutions to the problem by looking at the code, the stack trace, all of that. So we've dabbled in it a little bit. I wouldn't say it's consuming the company necessarily, but we're interested.
Last question. One prediction from each of you. Taylor, I'm going to start with you. One prediction for the future of open source. Go.
There will probably be lots more JavaScript, and I hope more PHP.
Armin?
We'll have many more discussions about open source licenses.
Eric?
Maybe not a prediction, but a wish. I hope we finally solve how to pay open source contributors.
It's a mic drop moment. 6 seconds left. We're going to end on that. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks, everyone, for being here.